Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Walker Art Center. I'm Amanda Hunt, the head of Public Engagement, Learning, and Impact. Thank you for joining us inside for great conversation, content, community on a beautiful day. We're here to celebrate the opening of Ways of Knowing. Congratulations to my colleague, Rosario Güiraldes. I'm so proud of you. The show is gorgeous. Before we begin, I'd like to ground us by acknowledging that the Walker Art Center and the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden are located on the contemporary, ancestral, and traditional homelands of the Dakota people. This site, which was once an expanse of marshland and meadow, holds meaning for the Dakota, Ojibwe, and indigenous people from other Native nations who still live in community today. It is my pleasure also to acknowledge the generous supporters of this exhibition, the KHR McNeely Family Foundation, thanks to Kevin, Rosemary, and Hannah Rose McNeely, and the Martin and Brown Foundation. Additional support was provided by Louis Baskerville and Helen and Peter Warwick. Thank you as well. The Walker's commission of one artist, Eduardo Navarro, the Cloud Museum, which I hope you've all seen the exhibition. If you have not, plenty of time after the talk today, followed by a performance at 3:30 in the galleries by Cheng Yu Chen. One of the artists you'll see, beautiful costumes surrounded by pink. That work was supported by Lois and John Rogers. The exhibition catalog was supported by Rosina Liui and a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation in support of Walker Art Center publications. Ways of Knowing spans drawing, photography, film, and installation, charting some of the most profound ways that today's artists engage with information and research. The 11 artists featured in this exhibition excavate these dynamics with a sense of curiosity, rigor, and play, and acknowledging that information is produced and research is partial. They all challenge assumptions about how we come to know what we know. So today, in the spirit of being invited to reconsider the complexities of knowledge, identity, and culture, we'll be sitting with some of the artists and the curator of the exhibition. It's important to note that most of the works in Ways of Knowing are being shown in the United States for the first time, and we are so thrilled to have 7 of the artists joining us this weekend for our opening events. Today's panel features 3 of those artists, Cabello, Carceller, Gala Porras-Kim, and Christine Howard Sandoval, moderated by exhibition curator Rosario Güiraldes. You can find all of their bios in your program. Please join me in welcoming them all to the stage.
Okay, hi everyone. Hi Elena, Carceller, Christine, and Gala. So I just want to begin by joining Amanda in welcoming you all to today's panel discussion. And I'll just begin by saying that contemporary group exhibitions are really central to the mission of institutions like the Walker. They really allow us to recognize and respond to emerging tendencies in contemporary art, but also and fundamentally to introduce our audiences to new generations of artists. And so today, as Amanda was saying, we're fortunate to have 7 of the 11 artists in the exhibition. There's 11 artists, but Cabello and Carceller are a duo, so we're 8 out of 11, or 12, depending how you want to count. But over the next 45 minutes, we're going to be exploring their practices and how their work engages with the exhibition's core themes, which are the prevailing role of research as an artistic strategy. It's used not as a means to an end, but as a tool to be subverted, to interrogate what is presented in many instances as truth and knowledge. So the artists and Ways of Knowing approach research in 3 essentially distinct ways. There's 3 thematic sections across the exhibition. Some co-opt research and co-opt historical research methods to expose gaps in official records or to tease out entirely new narratives. Others reject the notion of research and its neutrality and turn to indigenous and place-based ways of knowing, while others embrace tools like intuition or imagination to reveal the limitations of conventional knowledge. So together, I see these works as really probing how art can really expand and challenge how we come to understand the world, but fundamentally the complexities of what it means to be alive today. So if time allows, we will have 15 minutes for a Q&A, but if we're like really excited, we might just meet our full hour talking among ourselves. But collect your questions and stay tuned. So with that, I want to turn it to Elena Cabello and Carceller for my first question. So your practice engages in a really fascinating dialogue between history and contemporary queer and trans politics. And in one of our earlier conversations in the making of this show, you said that there are many stories to be told. So my first question for you is, why this particular story? How did you encounter this portrait?
First, we wanted to work with someone who lived near in the Basque Country, because it's where the art center that we were preparing the work for is placed. And then, even though we knew Erauso from long before, we had never wanted to work with them because we thought it was a person that was really, we didn't like him really.
We are not into his history.
Too Catholic, too aggressive. He was a killer. But then suddenly we thought, maybe this is the reason, this conflict personality is the reason why we should approach Erauso and try to work with him.
And try to understand too what an individual can do in history when the world puts you in that position, that particular position.
And then when we met the painting, the old painting, we realized that the painting was going to be like the point of departure and conversation for us to relate to Erauso, so that Erauso could speak from their portrait and could speak to us from beyond. And so that's how we decided
what
to
we
start.
really appreciate of the painting is the first painting that we found, that in you have a portrait of a trans person, like posing, but proud of be there, proud to be dressed like a soldier in a man, not because of a soldier, but because he could dress as a man too. So for us, it was really important to confront the eyes of the person, of that person. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to return to this question, but I'm going to move on to Gala. And I would like to ask you, what kind of objects do you find yourself most drawn to in your practice? And how and when did you come across the particular set of objects that this piece engages with?
What type of objects? I think that for me, when I look at works in, is this on? Yeah. Looking through collections, I'm drawn to ones that feel really set, like someone has decided that everything has been resolved, and so they feel really tightly squeezed by like certainty that is not actually true. And so I like to kind of think about what are the contemporary things that people want this object to do that has set those really tight constraints for it, for me to not be able to recognize other ones You know, because when I go into collections, I see multiplicity of histories that this object has gone through, etc. At this point is LARPing as a historical object that's teaching us about X or whatever, but it could also be a paperweight, it could also be a bookend, whatever, no? But the ones that erase all the other ones and make it harder to see is the ones that I'm more drawn to, because that helps me understand my own kind of categorical limitations as well, and my own expectation of what the collection is going to do for myself. With this particular work, I wanted to learn about the Korean national treasures, the North and South Korean national treasures, and I kind of wanted to really see what were the generational groups of people that decided the set. You know, because it's like, first of all, who decides what is a treasure? Like a treasure for me, different than a treasure for you. No? And so to be a nation deciding these things when the history of Korea has gone through many changes as a nation, how does those changes in that border change the, or like container of objects has changed the things within the container, no? And so you can see in the drawing, like the top, it starts at the top, you know, they're collated South Korea and North Korea national treasures, because they were all made pre any of contemporary intervention in the town. So it, you can see the first row is all architecture because it was made during the Japanese occupation, and it was an architect who decided that these buildings are the treasure. Then they went away, North and South Korea separated, and then each one's decided different things were different treasures, even though those objects, and changes generation, it was like tax records at the bottom, and so at some point there was an accountant or whatever. And so it's really, you can see so much about how this very neutral sounding set is actually changing all the time.
Right. Yes. I mean, there's a slide I think further down, but you can see it if you haven't had time to see the work in the show now. This is like a very large 4-panel piece where Gala essentially intersperses a set of 530 national treasures across North and South Korea. So you're moving from this panel as you're viewing it from top left to right and seeing how over time what each nation deems that is worthy of cultural preservation shifts. But I was also, I guess, trying to get to this idea of the function of these objects that you I see you as a bit of like an advocate of like the object and the object's previous life, and you've spoken before and like in numerous other instances about how when these objects enter museum collections, that function changes.
Yes, like when you think about some of them as like teacup. So who made that teacup was like, this is for tea, we're gonna drink tea. Somebody probably drank tea. Then all of a sudden someone decided this is a treasure. So like we can never put tea on it ever again because conservator is going to be like, what are you doing? And so now, because it entered a collection, now the building becomes the author of the sculptural object that used to be in the shape of a teacup. Now it's not a teacup because tea's function. So for me, it's not like setting like, yes, to be defined as a teacup, it needs to have tea inside, but what is the definition of that function, no? And so it's, for me, I love thinking about how institutions are actually making more artworks than artists are making artwork sometimes, you know, because they just go in the collection and be like, I think this is obviously an artwork, and you're like, who is the author of that?
Right. Yeah. So I guess we're different kinds of conflicts, conflicted historical figures and narratives, conflicts in like the use of objects. But Christine, in your practice is really rooted in your personal history, the personal history of your ancestors. The series of works that are included in the show, A Wall is a Shadow on the Land, is made with Adobe. I want to go and have a conversation about Adobe and its meaning. But the series references this 18th and 19th century Spanish mission architecture that is present in today too. But I wanted to talk also about, as we're talking about conflict, reconnecting with the reports that yourself, like that you did as a fourth grader in school growing up in California, and how rediscovering that entanglement with that history, with that curricula, contributed to the development of this series.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super interesting, Gala, that you started the work at the top with the architecture, because it's along the lines of what I was thinking about, how architecture functions to kind of entrench the colonial narrative. So it embodies that. It embodies that as a kind of structure that also, in the case of the missions, they also kind of operate as museums. They're literally museums today that are supported by state funding, but then they also kind of embody this history. And so they continue to teach a certain narrative of colonial history within California. And then they also become an archive, literally the material is an archive as well. So I think thinking through the architectural forms was how I started, but I also, in coming to the architectural forms, I wanted to start with my formal education as a fourth grader. So in California, when I was growing up years ago, and they still teach it, but it was it wasn't official curriculum in California public school, but it was widely taught the Mission Project, which is a fourth grade research paper. So it was my first introduction to research, actually, as a student. And the research component has a written text where you have like a bibliography and a glossary and drawings, and then written reportage and citation. And then you have this diorama, so you have this artistic component as well, where you're given a certain mission, you're assigned one, and then you reiterate the architecture through a diorama. So the architecture is already kind of embedded in the way that you're researching this colonial history. Luckily, my mom had this report. I found it in her closet. I don't know why she still has it. It's really amazing that she had it. But I had these drawings. So the image that you're seeing here is a public artwork in Vancouver at the Yaletown train station. And it was made and installed alongside a gallery exhibition that allowed me to show the documentation from the research. So it happened as a collage. The other side of it, it wraps around the facade of the train station. But there are two images. One is a drawing of Father Sarah, who was kind of the leading missionary. You might have recognized his name, very famous within California colonial history. But it was the drawing that I made of him when I was 10. And I treated it as a kind of forensic, documentation of a psychology that was happening. Me trying to create a drawn portraiture of, this architect to colonization, not having any training as an artist at that time, and struggling to figure out how to render from an image this portrait. And it has, it has all of this kind of subliminal information that I was really interested in coming to later in life. And I paired it with, some of the other documents. All of them are, so there's no photography in the work. It's all drawing, maps, handwritten notes from J.P. Harrington serves as the kind of ground for the collage. The J.P. Harrington was, maybe one of the, most known ethnologists in California indigenous history. So these are specifically notes that he did of Rosario Cooper, who was the last language speaker for the Chumash, for the northern Chumash. And so I thought it was really I wanted to use her direct narrative as the ground for a lot of the research that I was doing. Thinking through language, thinking through architecture, and then thinking through its relationship to the materiality of the drawings. So yeah, architecture was is kind of like the thread that ties together the whole project.
It hadn't occurred to me up until now that I was just thinking about this report in relationship to Petrit's piece, because in that piece too, he's like revisiting these drawings that he did when he was 12 years old, and using them and treating them as characters, so like different ways of kind of like approaching a history of loss, a history of trauma and conflict by researching like your own history, your own narrative. But my next question, I wanted to bring some like really interesting point that was made in relationship to the catalog. I moderated a roundtable discussion with Claire Bishop, an art historian, Cuauhtemoc Medina critic, and an artist, Nick Guagnini. And Cuauhtemoc made a really interesting point in relationship to your work, Gala, this idea of supplementary research, sort of like the research about the research. And I wanted just to ask if you have like any ideas, any thoughts around this.
Yes, I think, for me, it's a question of how the taxonomy was developed. There's a shelf, and who decided the size of it and the conditions that things inside of it get made. So it could be like any type of conceptual container, like language or history or institutions or museum, physical, immaterial ones. And so when I was learning about the taxonomy of institutions, I was thinking, like, how did the TMS get made? Like, who decided that it had to be author, medium, date, year, size, whatever, no? Because when I go look at the catalog, the most interesting part is the notes, like the other, because curators are trying to like do like matrix style moment where it's like none of the fields fit the actual information that we learn living through the material itself. And so when I thought about it, I was like, how did the catalog ever be like that? And so it was made from scientific cataloging. And so when, like a not ethnographic, a biological specimen, etc., and then people started collecting cultural objects, using the same infrastructure as nature is not the same, because culture is, everybody can look at an object and be like, that means something different to me. It's not set in one singular viewing. And so when I was thinking about it, I was like, there's infinite amounts of ways we can actually view all of the objects, but we are only presented with one. And so that is actually, when I think about conservation, you are aware of there's this thing called the 10 agents of deterioration, which is like light exposure or like water or whatever, the basic ones. But one of the most interesting ones is disassociation, when you lose whatever the context of this object is, and so you don't know what it is. And I was actually thinking, when you categorize something in a singular historical moment, you're disassociating everything else. And it's damage. And like conservators will be like, do not put that in a window. But to think that when you enter it in the TMS, that's also damage. And so in those terms, I was like, how do we recognize what the immaterial damage to the singular placement of something might be?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. No, and I wanted to connect also this question of method and types of research and approaches to research. Elena and Carceller, you've spoken about a notion of queer methodologies in relationship to your practice. So this idea of like placing people in sort of like uncomfortable like situations, in playing with notions of time, and engaging them also with unconventional actions, and collaborating with individuals who might not have or experience like in performing in front of the camera. So I wanted to talk about this idea of a queer methodology in relationship to your work?
We also are in an uncomfortable position too when we are working with people too. So.
Yes, we try to look for collaborators who are not professionals in a way, not actors or actresses, or so that this feeling of uncomfortability has to do with our own sense of experiencing life and how we feel. You were talking about researching the research. This is also very, I would say, in a way, it's also a queer approach to research, since, for example, Erauso is very clear example as to talk about this, because there was a lot of research on Erauso already. So we thought, is there anything we can add? I mean, there's so many books that have been written about Erauso. There's so many research, so much research that has been
Even
done.
films, there are too.
Films. But then we felt that all this research kept us like outside. We didn't feel that our experience was included. And also there wasn't a relationship with our time, our contemporary time now. So disrupting these linear narratives that have been constructed has to do for us with also a queer approach that tries to disrupt time, to fragment time. Maybe we were talking to you before. It's like making the sense of time, linear time, dance in a way. So this is for us a way of working. Also, you were talking about architecture. For us, the relationship of bodies with architecture has also to do with with the museum itself. So that's why when we can, we should, when we have a commission, we try to imagine stories that could happen in the place where the publics are going to relate to the work.
Yeah,
so
this is a way to say how the stories are being built. So you see all the tricky things of the camera when you are in the same position that the actors sometimes. So it's really interesting the way you think you are inside the screen and outside the screen at the same time. This just happened once, because later you see it in another place, so it's nothing. But we like to put people in an uncomfortable way, because it's also the way that you need to defend yourself in a way. I mean, to take position, to put in the other people's skin, to know how they feel. So I told you, it's a joke, that we feel also uncomfortable because sometimes we are doing things that we never did before. When we started, for example, to raping philosophy, for example, rapping, sorry, but in a way it's kind of the same. We asked to 3 MCs to make a concert about violence with philosophical text, like Achille Membe or Judith Butler or Susan Sontag or things like that. But we never worked before with MC people. And as queer people, the MC's world is like quite far away from us. So we feel of doing something experimental, and what's going on will happen at the end.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about this idea of architecture and the body. Christine, in relationship to you, I was telling Christine yesterday that I felt like that, this exhibition was really built from the artworks. I was really driven to understand how artists are working, and from there go to the whys. And I felt like when I met Christine, our conversations really gave me something which was, well, if we're thinking about research, of course, like, it's not a neutral practice, and this is a word and a practice that has made an incredible amount of damage throughout time. We talked about Linda Tuhiwai-Smith. We talked about research, as she says, being the dirtiest word there ever has been. But so, anyways, that sort of gave me, I guess, license to want to examine this question about research from a range of different perspectives. And Christine, you have this series of works where you actually really treat research as an embodied practice. You have these performances where you move through a land and you wear like a GoPro camera where you're like literally also implicating the viewer and putting the viewer in your perspective. And I think that that's also like a nice connection that I'm seeing in between what you were just saying, Carceller.
Yeah, it's funny because I was just before coming here today, I was at Louise Erdrich's bookstore and I purchased the 3rd edition of Decolonizing Methodologies because it has, I teach, and so I teach from that book as well. And there are all these letters that were written to her. Linda Tuay Smith is a Maori scholar and an anthropologist and cultural anthropologist. And so she's written, you know, this is really important book that many scholars and artists and people who research go to that book for an entrenched kind of examination of indigenous modes of research within Western colonial scholarship, but as indigenous scholars. So not renouncing scholarship and not renouncing the term research completely, but kind of turning it on its head. So I think it's funny that we're bringing this up right now. But yeah, going back to, you know, even like self-implication, you know, implicating yourself as an artist and finding yourself inside of the archive, I think was really important for me, was to find our documents, our names, our families' names within the National Archive and within the state colonial archives. So that was something that I did, and I found documents from my great-grandfather that were handwritten and turned those also into sculptures. And, you know, the sculptures kind of perform a kind of aesthetic redaction through weaving. And we're not looking at the image right now. And I know your question was about the videos, but the videos, you know, they use a technology of surveillance, and they're surveilling, you know, the lower half of my body. So when I show them, they're very monotonous. They're meant to be monotonous purposefully. They show kind of a lower, ground-looking, downward-turned perspective of the land, and my body kind of walking on the land with. Often there's like a voiceover script that also encapsulates a lot of this research. So it's a way for me to ask questions and caption sometimes in non-logistical ways what you're seeing in the video itself. So I use some of the ways that imagery gets captioned, the way that it gets defined or explained, but I do it in ways that kind of complicate what we're seeing. And I also, while walking and while doing these performances for videos, I often avoid looking up at the horizon. So there's never a point where you're kind of given an exit into a horizon or a distance. So you're often always trapped within this body that's negotiating a terrain. And then it's got a fisheye quality to it, which you can see the shadow of the GoPro on my head there. So it has this destabilizing quality of the image, and it's the way that I show them is that they're projected at the scale of the body. So your body, the audience's body, is always kind of meeting the scale of my body, and then there's this feeling of falling towards the projection. So it destabilizes the audience, and so it gives you, you know, it's meant to kind of disrupt the feeling of standing in place, of being static. It's meant to kind of collapse the space between there and here, the here of the exhibition, the there of the space where I'm walking. And, you know, I'm always thinking about the question that, like, you know, land artists like Robert Smithson was asking around the binary of the site and the non-site. and trying to collapse that binary, because that's also part of this kind of erasure, that there's only this option, that option, and none of the between. It's a very Western construction. So technology, voiceover, research, and different kinds of techniques of performance maybe start to deconstruct a little bit of that binary.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to connect, I guess maybe a question around, I mean, you were speaking about Robert Smithson, but I want to move into also talking about medium and medium specificity and how the mediums that you work with are in line with like your practices. So both Christine, you and Gala work with drawing. So I wanted to ask, how you see drawing as a vehicle for research? You know, obviously drawing, I mean, Christine, even though you work at a pretty monumental scale, and your works are kind of like quite impressive in that way, and rich, and they could also be seen as paintings. But there's something about there's something about its scale, like the scale of drawing, the intimacy of drawing, like how close you have to get to drawing, and in your case, Gala, you're kind of like also kind of borrowing from the language of scientific drawing as a method of like kind of like really studying closely. So I want to perhaps let you to like respond to why drawing, and how does it fit within the practice.
Okay. We're laughing because we were talking about it over lunch, how people think that they could be paintings, but they're drawings because they're not paintings. And I think that, drawing allows it to be less stuck in a capital A artwork, and can be also existing in like architectural renderings. And what I liked about, when I was thinking about the medium, I was like, I've been doing the same production since I was like 5, and it's still the same, just bigger and tighter or whatever, no? But what I liked about it was thinking that everybody's doing that at some point, or still doing it. Like, at home when you even write a note, it's a drawing. And so in a sense, everybody can kind of recognize the action that you're doing as well. And so what I thought was like, it would be interesting if the audience also feels like they could, actually anybody could make that if they have time and patience. And so the accessibility to something that is not particularly skilled on my, like, it's not my hand, it's our collective hand or something like that. And then, because the drawing, at least for me, you're drawing at like pencil tip amounts, like that's the rate, like the sharpened pencil is the rate in how you see. So I actually think that I am a very low patience person, and so I have to making a drawing like that forces me to look in this very tight line, and I almost sometimes feels like a perv, because you're like, I know every brick in this building because I stared at it for 3 months or whatever, no? And so in a sense, it's a different familiarity with the subject that you can, like, I know some cracks in like some ceramic pot or whatever, and when you see it in real life, because they're made from photographs, I'm like, I know what, like, so in a sense, it's a different muscle. No?
Yeah. Well, you were even talking yesterday about some of the objects that are rendered, drawn in your panel, that there was like a glass or a vase that is red.
There's, one of the, that drawing also shows the different types of documentation of historical objects, and one of the bronze objects in there is a red vase, and it actually, when I showed it for the first time, the person who took that picture was like, I took that picture. And I'm like, whoa. And he was like, it's actually a green bronze vase. Patina is green, but the photo became red because, it like is old, and so it was exposed to whatever, and then I saw it as a red vase. And so in a sense, it was also this extra layer of documentation, malfunction or function of decay, or if you want to look at it like that, that became that. I don't know if you have a picture of it. The pot. No, that's not. But somewhere in there is a pot.
Christine?
There's something about drawing that feels to me so much like it's the foundation for thinking for many different practices. And there's something very direct about it. All the work, like my looking, at the larger approach in my practice with materiality is it's always a kind of direct, stripped down approach to making the work. And I don't think of these works as grappling with some of the questions that have to do with painting at all. And it's the reason why they're not mounted. Gala was asking, why aren't they mounted? Because I don't want that relationship. There's something too stiff about that. I want them to read as paper. The paper is really important to me as a surface, because there's something that allows for change. This idea of thinking through problem solving through drawing is really important to the works themselves. And they also, the image of this iteration of this work is different than the iteration of what it is in the gallery right now. They're always changing. These pieces are not static as much as, I know, to the demise of what a museum would want. They are not they are not static.
We experienced that while installing them.
They refuse that intentionally, and that's what the work is about. And I think drawing actually meets that demand. It's the closest medium and way of making that I think kind of meets that thinking. And so, I think of these as drawings. They are very sculptural. They don't easily kind of fit within any kind of genre of making, actually. So, but drawing seems to be like the closest, theoretically, to what I want from the work.
So, Cabello, Carceller, I want to also talk about the kind of like the display device in your work. It's a 2-channel piece, and the narrative, like the script that these 3 actors are performing, is sort of like moving from one screen to the other. So you're in a way referencing a diptych. You're kind of like alluding to this circular notion of time, of a narrative that moves from the present to the future and then back to the past. So I wanted to talk about this this formal device in relationship to this work, how you approach that.
I thought you were going to ask us about drawing, but
you
yes,
can answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Gala and Christine also disrupt disciplines in a way, each one. So for us, it's also important. Carceller was talking before about rap in philosophy or dancing a text, thinking about a text, an essay as a music that you can dance is kind of a way of thinking of disciplines, text, image, in a way that is not the usual way we relate to them. For this specific work, when we first thought, there's an oil portrait who's going to sing. He's going to sing from beyond. This portrait is going to relate to us through singing, through rap, with a music that is contemporary in a way, but also has some Baroque string notes mixing. And this has to be also apoyar, ¿cómo se dice? Supported by this visual double image that surprises you in a way, because sometimes you have one of the one side working and then the other side is not working. You never know which one is going to work next.
Yeah.
So it helps us disrupt this linear timeline that we were talking about. And also it has to do with a subject that is mirroring, that is looking at themselves in a way, and you're never satisfied with what you see. You're never completely satisfied with the image that is reflected, that is read about you. So I think the double projection works with that.
Yeah, it also allow you to work with original and copy and what is the right thing, the anchor read or not. As you see in the video, there are two pictures of Eroso. One is used during the shooting, and the original picture. In the first exhibition, we have both of them looking at each other. So people at the end of
original portrait and a copy,
the copy of
later
the 19th century. So you don't know exactly who's for or who's not, who's talking to you. It's like a mirror, never-ending story. So with the two screens, you can play with this instability of doing what is real, what is first. We at the beginning of our career, we also used to the photography and the reverse. Also, not to say to you what is the original or what is and not the other way, the mirror image. So.
Yeah, so you shot the video with the 19th century copy, but in the installation here at the Walker, we actually borrowed the
both
400.
Both of them are on the video.
Ah, okay.
Some images, like the images that we are seeing now, are taken from the original portrait, but then the portrait that you see on the video that is relating to the different characters, the different subjects, it's the copy. It was funny because when we showed both the original and the copy, people tend to prefer the copy. Yeah. Because the original painter, what we like about this original painting that you can see now here at the Walker is that the painter respected very much this masculine identity of Erauso, and the skin, for example, is not rosy, is not a rosy feminine complexion. It's quite
more darker in a way. It's kind of.
But then the painter who did the copy, he thought, this is not feminine enough. So we are going to give it a more feminine complexion. So people tend to like the copy more because of that, because it's closer to what you would expect of a portrait of a woman.
Yeah. I was also thinking about how some of the other formal devices that you've used within the installation, like the draped curtains, the photographs of the three portraits that are also the kind of like three-quarter bust, kind of like chiaroscuro. So how with those formal devices, you're kind of like referencing this Baroque time of the portrait. And I wanted to follow up to that question, asking about how some of those decisions fit into what we're seeing in the installation.
Yeah, because we wanted the contemporary collaborators to replicate in a way the pose of the original portrait, and also we related to them in a very Baroquean way of photographing them, so that this conversation across time and across genders could happen also very like visually clearly in this relationship between these contemporary portraits and the older one.
We live in a Baroque era too, because I don't know, when you are always in childhood, looking at the Prado Museum and all this kind of stuff. And the Spanish painting is a brown one. I mean, the brown is the color of Spain. It's not the sun. If you look at the painters always use this kind of earth colors. You see, it's a dark word. It's a word for suffering. No? So for us, it's also to take these actual persons, to put them on the past, to give them the quality of the people who was posing for the painter, and in a way looking the gaze they have when they are posing in this manner of a history. Our three friends were really considering that they are impersonating the past in a way.
Yeah. So Christine, I think that we have time for one more question to each. But we were talking, corresponding over email in the last few days, and you talked about how in making this works, you're obviously thinking about Spanish missions, their architectural forms, but you mentioned about these ideas of an architecture, the form, and materiality in relationship to structural collapse. So I wanted you to maybe speak a little bit about that, and maybe speak a little bit more about Adobe and how you see that material, how it fits both in your personal narrative, but also culturally and politically.
Well, Adobe is this material that comes from desert regions. So it's found in cultures globally that are desert regions, desert cultures. So it kind of, brings together many different cultures, and we all have different recipes for how we make Adobe. And, it's kind of like cooking. We have different recipes in our cultures, and but Adobe's never meant to be a permanent material. So it always needs some kind of yearly maintenance. It's meant to be made as a brick. It's also something that gets stuccoed onto the facade of like an exterior. It also is just an incredibly sustainable material. You think about the ecological benefits of using this material, in places that are experiencing, climate change, and people who are losing their houses, people who can't afford real estate or to build a house. This is just a really sustainable way of thinking about building your own shelter. So it has this very long kind of ancient history. But also, when I was making the series of works, it was during the time when many of the monuments were being taken down, which included the monument of Father Sarah in California. So that had been toppled at one of the missions. And so I was thinking about these as monuments, thinking about architecture as not just kind of monumental in scale, but as monuments to certain kinds of narratives. And I was thinking about the eventual shedding of the material. These are made to live. These are living materials. So when I say that they're living, I mean that they're not static, and they're not going to behave in a way that that abide by the laws of like the collection, when you're talking about ephemerality. And so I'm thinking about all of these things, like the propensity to change, and to change with movement, to change with time, to change with weather. So this relationship to the environment. I'm thinking about these as monuments colonially, but also as something that belongs to indigenous technologies and ways of living. So the architecture in California is not with Adobe. That's not a traditional architectural material. Our indigenous architectures are made with grasses, different kinds of tall bunch grasses that are also ephemeral, and they're also seasonal and come from the land. So I was thinking about the relationship between these two types of labor. The labor of the making of the missions was done through slave labor. So it was compelled labor of people who were contained within the mission systems, which was something that is really well documented, actually. What was the other part? I'm forgetting. There was another part of your question that I'm thinking about. Okay.
Adobe.
Yeah,
and
as a materiality.
materiality.
Yeah. So it kind of holds multiple layers of history, cultural meaning, ephemerality, relationships to sustainability right now. You know, a lot of those points.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the conservation of your drawings, and I'm thinking, what would it look like if in 100 years, Gala, you were dealing with like these drawings in your practice? How would you look at them? How would you treat them? But maybe last question, and maybe we'll have time for one or two questions. Gala, the work that is on view here in the show is obviously a part of like a larger ongoing series of drawings that you title Index, that are thinking about how institutions collect and sort of like sort and represent usually like artifacts, like historical artifacts and cultural artifacts. And you've always used this sort of like shelving, sort of like imaginary shelving device. In previous sort of like instances of this series, the objects that you render, that you draw, are sort of like drawn in a kind of like 1-to-1 scale, and the shelving sort of like shifts and adapt to fit the size of these objects. And in 530 National Treasures, you're kind of like collapsing all of them together, and kind of like creating this like very even, sort of like strict grid shelving system. So I wanted to talk about the shelf.
Yes, I think that this type of bodies of works has helped me think through different types of collection questions. You know, like they're not all categorized similarly, and so when I was changing the shelf to accommodate the dimension of the actual object, I was thinking about how the institution could conceptually also change to fit what the amount of things might be. You know, I think that what would it look like if instead of the objects only being turned into a cultural object by being in this building, the building also became like tea shop because it has tea things inside of it, or it was like a hat. This one has like 3 helmets, so it could be four hats, so it could be like hat closet also, and also museum. And so in a sense, it was thinking about how it would be a two-way conversation that doesn't just prioritize the container, which is what happens in collections. And then this one was particularly about how in LACMA there's a West Mexico ceramic collection, but then it was from 3 different areas, completely different areas, but then it became West Mexico. And so I made 3 different panels that were like, okay, what was it before? And then you can start seeing different patterns within the set. And so I wanted to know what was the difference. And so I was like, okay, I used them as my own type of research, as I said. With the one that you see in the gallery, it wasn't so much about, it doesn't go up and down. And so it's just straight lines because it's not necessarily about how the museum that holds they're not a specific collection in a building. They're sparse all over the place. You know, architecture is in the floor somewhere outside. But it's about, then I'm like, I have to think about the ordering of them, and then it's not about similar questions. So I don't know, it depends on kind of the question of the time, and so they might look very similar, but they have different reasonings why. I think about it like a curatorial project in a way, that I'm like, I'm making this this other connection, but I don't want to curate either, so it's what is already there.
There's no shadow either.
Oh yeah.
I like that. I mean, that's important.
But there's perspective.
Well, okay, so the other thing is that all of them get made from photographs of how it's been documented in the museum or collection or however I find, I don't really make the drawings from the thing. And so the shelf is made at the end because the photos are all taken from different perspectives, like up and down, in like range of direction. And so it doesn't look like, it's just destabilizing that they all are like up and down, and so visually is this trompe-l'oeil way of stabilizing an image, and that's why there's no shadow, because at the end I have to make a stick that is like, why is this pot like so oddly forward or whatever, and it's just so it kind of, it's practical too.
Yeah, we had a lot of conversations during install around at what height would we install them. In relationship to that perspective. But I think that we've reached the hour, so since we have a little bit of time, I wanted to open it up in case anyone has some questions to make. And there's a microphone. There's 2 microphones on the 2 aisles. Or the conversation can continue outside, more informally. Okay, there's here. Yep.
Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing and coming at this in such a interesting way. I guess I want to circle back to something that Gala was speaking about, the elements, the 10 agents of destruction, and how that works. It kind of works through everything everybody was saying today in terms of the well, from the one thing, we've got an original painting, but then we have a copy, which is actually maybe for a lot of people the more interesting version of it. And we have objects that are outdoors, that are decaying through time, and then the recreation of objects. So I'm wondering, where do you see the importance in a collection, in an institution to collect? If it's not sort of the object itself, how do we sort of get the primary experience without having to sort of worship the integrity of the original?
I don't think that any of us can access an original because none of us were alive for the majority of whatever's in a collection. And so I think that the version that we get presented is a very close interpretation. And so, when it's so set in the scientific way of displaying collections, like, the Wunderkammer, like biology specimen moment, and then it went into like ethnographic collections, and then it went into like a card catalog, which then became the contemporary version of that, which looks exactly the same as the 18th century style TMS, which is the museum system. It's like Excel for museums. And so in a sense, it's like at those points, you're making a border. And so in a sense, when I think the importance of keeping a collection is to say, what do we need these objects to do for us today? And many people are inheriting like what people needed those objects to do for them 100 years ago, 300 years ago, 700, So in a sense, it's like, how do we not have it become a singular function and recognize that like every time that even an audience sees an object, the relationship between those two things is a singular, correct interpretation of what that might be for them. And then we're trying to collectively agree on like kind of it's a container, yes, but it could also be that. So in a way it's additive. It's not a singular taxonomy, and so one of my current questions is basically how does that look like in an Excel shape? Like there are already different ways of cataloging information, like muscle memory, how do you TMS that? No, or like body, like I'm like, the bugs are cataloging the material too, because they have a relationship to the wood they're eating. And so they can be like tastiest to like most, which is legit. And so in a sense is, which of these versions of organizing the world do we prioritize when we recognize that there's a multiplicity? And then we can say, today we need it to be top this, but then reorganize it tomorrow. It's also that. And so that order and sort of, I think you said like something about being dense. Like it's a density of information that then we can really recognize other people, like who are the stakeholders. It's like everything that has a relationship to that material is a stakeholder.
Any other questions?
Yes, hello. Thank you for being here. The exhibit focuses on understanding the known world through like language, history, institutions, architecture, all things that you guys noted. I'm wondering if you can say anything about the curiosity of the unknown, uncovering new knowledge and discovering new ways of knowing that might inspire your work at all.
I mean, I think that, I feel like that's a great question, because I feel like that's at the root of artistic inquiry. If you know, then there's no reason to do it. And so that, I think, I don't want to speak for everyone on the panel, but probably safe to say that we operate from not knowing, and we don't arrive at a knowing. If you only arrive at more questions. And so I don't know that we are knowledge generators. I wouldn't say that I'm generating knowledge in any way. I'm just kind of interacting with a set of possibilities, and then that kind of gets exploded during the process. So I don't know what's going to happen. But in the end, I think, there is a hope that there is a more clarity on some intentionality, or maybe you're able to get to the next step and a better question, And I think maybe that is also, we've been talking a lot about stasis and not arriving at stasis, or kind of avoiding or pushing back at something being resolved or being static. I think the same thing can be applied to this idea, or the term knowledge as well, that it's a process. It's really not an endpoint. So I think, I don't think aesthetics, like I work with aesthetics, and aesthetics is a way of kind of living in the world, and developing relationships. So if anything, it's about relationships.
I'm not sure if I understood your question exactly, but listening to Christine, I think we completely agree with what she just said. And I think also our works, I speak for us now, have also to do with a possibility of recognizing that we don't know, and that to be able to know that we don't know is really important.
Same, but it made me think about the ways I learn how to learn first, which is general school, and how much unlearning I had to do after. And so, my parents are both academics, so I'm also very institutionalized myself. But then I was thinking about, if the institution is the medium, what is the temperature that cooks like when you do clay tests, you're like, I'm going to cook it at every single layer to see what color comes out. And so I was thinking, like, what are the shapes of that. You know, you're just similar to your processes when you're like, how do you make the painting talk? I'm like, yes, how do you make the institution cook at a different rate or whatever, no? And so the question about knowing, I don't actually want to find the answer, because then I was like, then what will I do? You know, be like, go watch TV or something. And it made me think about my first show, which was I want to prepare to learn something I don't know, and how I'm still making that first show in a way, like it's never been, you know, I'm still preparing to learn something new, and the way is to find a new way of looking all the time. So sometimes you just like look at stuff you don't like, and it's like, why don't I like it? How will I convince myself that I like it? Not possible, but at the moment, but you know, then you like make your wall bigger.
I think that's a great place to end our conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you.